Is a moment in time, frankly, unlike any other in the history of medicine. I know that's a bold statement, but let me try to back it up. For thousands of years, every tool that you used, that we created, from the scalpel to the stethoscope to the MRI scanner, frankly, extended our hands, our senses, or our memory. But they never touched the core of what it means to think, to interpret, to understand, to care. That distinction may now have vanished. I pose that as an interesting question for you to reflect on. For the first time, we're building tools that extend the very thing we once believed made us uniquely human and was emphatically the province of humanity. Our capacity to model the world, to reason about uncertainty, to make meaning, and to offer care. The implications for healthcare are profound, and the pace at which this is happening is indifferent to the timelines of government, procurement, or policy. Many of you from institutions that are leading this effort, and are also potentially some of you under extraordinary pressure. An aging population with increasing chronic disease, clinicians stretched to their limits, finances that no longer align with the scale of demand, patients who want personalized, instantaneous answers, and the constant feeling, one I hear from all of you, that the complexity is now outpacing human bandwidth. We can fill in over here if you guys want to come on in. Hey, George.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Grab a chair, move my stuff. Great. And into this comes AI. Not politely, not incrementally, but with a velocity that's measured in months, not decades. Let me be candid. We do not get to vote on whether AI enters the healthcare system. That decision's already been made by capability curves, patient expectations, and global competition. The question is not whether AI is coming. Absolutely, the question is whether we shape the future or the future shapes us. And so today we're here to wrestle with a relatively simple question. Can machines care? Can they process images faster? Can they summarize a clinical note? Can they detect something we missed? Can they support a human being through illness in a way that is worthy of the word care? What does it mean for us? And the answer to the question is, in certain respects, yes. No person I can think of is better suited to tackle that particular interesting question than Shamil Chandaria. I spent 6 hours over the weekend immersing myself in his YouTube, in the podcasts he's appeared on, and he is absolutely at the nexus of neuroscience, philosophy, consciousness, Bayesian theorem. I mean, the whole thing. He really has the entire package. And the mix of science and philosophy and care and human intervention, you're going to hear just a little tidbit in the next 25 minutes that I think will start us on a very robust conversation. Shamil, is there anything I omitted that you'd like to jot?
No, that's
great. Then we'll start with you, and then we'll come back and we'll start with questions. And again, our aspiration for the session is that it be sporty. I hope you all help with that task.
Yes. So I mean, we'll do the questions after, but essentially, what I want to do in the first 20 minutes is actually take it slow and kind of go through the landscape. Do you want to? Anyone want to get on there?
See your screen.
Because what we're going to be talking about is essentially this very important question about consciousness as opposed to intelligence, and we'll then go into care. So will machines consciously care, and can we design AI to prioritize human care and flourishing? So the first thing to do is to tackle a particularly difficult question, which is what's the definition of consciousness? And in fact, this has been around in philosophy for a long time, and I think the best way in is simply to go through a number of different types of ideas of what we think consciousness is. Sentience, these are mostly synonyms. Wakefulness, which is actually not a synonym, it's kind of giving you some real content. Self-consciousness, what is it like? What is it like to be a bat? What it's like to have, to be something? That's by Thomas Nagel. Phenomenal states, awareness, kind of a synonym. Subjective phenomenal experience, or simply just experience. Mental states. Qualia, it's a technical philosophical word. one that I like is the lights are on inside, some sort of inner luminosity. The perception of what passes in a man's own mind, that's from John Rolfe. Watching your mind in action. Awareness of perceptions, thoughts, memories, feelings, and sensations. So that's a kind of pretty wide range of definitions. And I actually think the best way to do this is, in fact, to say it's a network of all of them. So, we know what we're talking about, but it's difficult to define because it kind of has this ineffable quality, but a real sense of, most people know what it is to be awake, to be aware. Now, the reason we did that is because I want to show you how different it is from intelligence. Intelligence is something completely different. Intelligence measures an agent's ability to perform well in a wide range of environments. And this is a very deep definition. Shamelad is a co-founder of DeepMind, where I work. And actually it's very technical. In fact, it doesn't look technical, but you have to think about what it is to perform well, and that's kind of getting rewards in an environment. Well, this doesn't shine. Having rewards in a particular environment. And you can also talk about the complexity of environments and kind of taking a weighted average over all those. So there's some pretty technical definition, but it means essentially it's kind of fulfilling your goals. So they're very different things, and yet we tend to conflate them. Why do we tend to conflate them? We tend to think, oh, it's getting really intelligent, must be kind of becoming self-aware, this AI. And we tend to conflate them because even though a priori they are orthogonal, they're completely different things, what we see is that there is this general correlation between level of intelligence and capacity for consciousness in the phylogenetic chain, going up from animals, and maybe humans are somewhere there. But interestingly, it might not be that we could actually come up with things that may have a great capacity for consciousness, but not have a lot of capacity for intelligence. Okay, old school. So actually, we're interestingly we're working with cerebral organoids, which are kind of like sort of brain cells that are kind of cohere, and the thought is, could we have islands of awareness that are aware but don't have a rich, complex intellectual life? On the other hand, we have narrow intelligence at the moment. So narrow intelligence is, self-driving car or playing chess or doing something excellently, probably to superhuman level, but it can only do one thing. So this is kind of, this idea of narrow intelligence was how AI first started. But as many of you know, the real goal for AI is to become a general purpose intelligence. In other words, not just be good at one task, but be good at a whole host of tasks. In fact, possibly all tasks that humans can do. And so then, the question that we have to ask is, as we start going towards artificial general intelligence, might it actually go towards having a greater capacity for consciousness? So it's a very controversial topic, and the reason why I wanted to say this is because everyone talks about intelligence, and people who haven't thought about this very deeply kind of almost assume that intelligence and consciousness will go together, but it's not the case. However, A close to ORI, it actually might be, and this is what we're going to discuss today. So, again, the purpose of today is actually to take it a little slow. It's a masterclass after all, so it's not just going to be lots of sound bites. We're actually going to, I want you to see how complex this landscape actually is. So, best not to shoot from the hip here. Theories of consciousness come in two broad flavors. The first is kind of metaphysical ideas of what the nature of consciousness is. And the second are scientific theories of consciousness, which really go with our best ideas from neuroscience and looking at what we think is going on in terms of the human brain, what are the neural correlates of consciousness, what's responsible for the level of consciousness. So first let's talk about the metaphysical theories. I mean, what we're talking about here are things like physicalism, that there is no such, there, in the universe there is only physical things. It used to be called materialism. Something that is could be understood as what our best theories of physics are alluding to, matter and energy. And some of them say that, look, consciousness is actually an illusion. Or they say that consciousness is identical with certain brain states. So this is kind of the idea of physicalism. We then have a very ancient idea, but it's not very popular in the modern world, but amongst scientists and philosophers it's gaining increasing popularity, which is in fact that, look, this whole thing about physicalism, I mean, do we ever actually know what the physical world is? All of our experiences are mediated through our minds, and the only thing we have acquaintance to is our awareness. So that's idealism, that only consciousness exists. In fact, the physical is an illusion. And we have ideas of panpsychism, that there's consciousness everywhere. The very famous and important, and I would say common sense view, which is Cartesian dualism, that we have mind and we have matter, and they're kind of two different things, but there's a problem with that view, which is that how would mind ever interact with matter? Descartes famously thought that, well, maybe it somehow pushes the pineal gland and that's how it gets in there. But no one's actually been able to improve on that. So the thing with these metaphysical theories is that we're going to put them aside today. And that is because we're not going to be talking about what's called the hard problem of consciousness. Why, why consciousness is the way it is, and how it could ever be related with neural firings going on in the brain. What we're going to be talking about is something else, which is, given that there is consciousness, what is associated with conscious content? What is associated with seeing red or seeing black? What is going on? In other words, we're going to be talking about what is associated with information processing that leads to conscious content. So there is there's lots of information processing going on in the brain, some of which actually rises up to the level of consciousness. Most of it doesn't, in fact. And so that's where we come to these scientific theories of consciousness. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because it's important to understand, for you to really get a flavor of the fact that everyone always thinks, oh, we have no idea what's going on. It's just such an easy thing to say. Actually, we do have quite a lot of idea what's going on. There's a lot of progress, and each of these theories actually has a lot of neuroscience evidence for them. So before we're just kind of pontificating and say, oh, we have no idea, actually, we do. The only problem is we have too many theories. Now, the good news is that we're going to find that there's a kind of common core to the theories, and that's what I'm going to be trying to communicate to you today. So a very important one is something called the global workspace theory, which basically says that, look, the brain is processing sensory information, has got all sorts of ideas, and somehow all of this information is competing with itself to get what's called fame in the brain, to be broadcast widely. So imagine that you're all neural systems going around, and you're all competing to get put onto some sort of blackboard, which is right in the front of the class, and whatever gets put on the blackboard is then rebroadcast to the entire brain. So that's the kind of idea of global workspace theory. Another important idea is that, in fact, it's called higher order thought theory, which is that we have all these processes that are going on, and some of them are then brought to the level of consciousness and undergo something called a meta-representation, a re-representation in the front of the brain, which kind of is like a headline, a newspaper headline, which kind of points to where the conscious information is. Another very mathematical theory, but deeply important, is something called integrated information theory, which is to say, which has got this deep and important insight, which is that somehow information is becoming self-aware. How does that happen? Well, what's critical in that is that the information has to know itself. So what does it mean for information to know itself? Well, roughly speaking, we think in these very linear ways, but if you have this informational network where parts of the network are so entangled and feed back to themselves, so that this entire network, subparts of the network have information about other parts of the network. So information is widely integrated and dispersed throughout the brain. So it's this level of information integration, and not all parts of the brain are integrated. For example, the cerebellum, which contains most of the neurons in the brain, is not integrated at all. And in fact, we have no conscious awareness of what the cerebellum is doing. It's kind of coordinating our fine motor actions. We have no awareness of that, but we do have awareness of things that are going on in the posterior cortices, our visual information. Another idea is that, look, actually what really matters is an integration with the body, and that we really can't separate the mind and the body together, and it's some sort of informational integration throughout the mind and body. So these are kind of an interesting selection of ideas. I won't go through them all, but just to give you an idea. So, now, when we look at all complex information processing systems, like the brain, like a computer, there are 3 levels of description that were first introduced by David Mark, of how to look at this system. The first level is it's a very high level system. It's called the computational level. What does information what does this information processing system actually do? What are its goals? What's the input-output behavior of this? So it's not looking in the inside, it's just kind of looking at the behavioral aspects, the kind of overall perspective. The second level is the algorithmic level, which is what is the system actually doing? What's the algorithms that it's doing? What representations, processes, is it employing? And then the third level is the implementation level. So that could be in terms of neurons and wetware, or the actual physical circuitry, the hardware of what's going on. And that is how is the system physically instantiated? How is it physically realized? What are the representations, and what are the representations and algorithms physically operationalized? Now, there are some theories of consciousness, I haven't actually gone through all of them, but like very important, that say, look, what consciousness really depends on is this computational level. And that's something like a behavioral Turing test. So if you've ever seen this excellent movie Ex Machina, that's essentially what's going on there. You know, one of the protagonists is hired to see if they feel that the AI is conscious. And that's actually surprisingly common. I mean, I would say that many people say, oh, I wouldn't believe in that. But actually, when you play with AI, you start to form these judgments and you have this intuition that the AI is conscious. Now, why is that? Why is this intuition so important? Because that's how we judge each other. That's how we judge other species. When we play with our dog or our cat or whatever, you know, we feel that there's a kind of consciousness there. And so we're doing this all the time. And as I'll explain, even though we might actually say that theories of consciousness that rely on the second level and the third level might be scientifically more sensible, have a greater credence. No one knows what the right answer is, but we can have credences around that. The public is actually going to be mostly working on this level, and we're going to have this very interesting view where many people will say the system is conscious. We had someone at Google, Blake Lemoine, who actually a couple of years ago, you know, lost his job because he really felt like the particular model was conscious. Then we have the next level, which is computational functionalism. So this is very, very important. These are the things that I was kind of talking about before. I won't go through them. Global workspace theory, higher order theory, actually something called predictive processing theory that I'm particularly partial to, which is like the brain is totally trying to predict the causes of its sensory data, and so it has internal models of what's going on. We simulate what's going on using Bayesian inference. And here's the punchline of some very difficult material. Basically, your conscious experience is the output of those simulated models, right? But they also have to be integrated. So some of these other points are integrated information theory, local recurrence, which is some sort of recursive processing. So recursion is the key thing. When these loops, how does information know itself? It loops back on itself. So this is the key thing that I want you to take away with you. Integration and recursion. All right. And that's going to be important when we look at current AI. The next level is the physical substrate. And this is really important. So many computer scientists tend to be computational functionalists. But actually, there are an increasing number of people, quite serious people, who think that no, the physical substrate is important. Now that ranges from the fact that we think, you know, that the brain is producing electromagnetic fields, and therefore the global workspace is some sort of electromagnetic field, kind of knowing itself. There's a kind of automatic information integration there. There are other ideas, for example, Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose, the Nobel Prize winner, think that the collapse of the quantum wave function is particularly important for consciousness. So there are others who say biopsychism, that kind of biology is deeply important to it, and a system that is not avoiding the second law of thermodynamics and fighting for its own existence and creating and being having metabolism to keep itself going cannot be conscious, or that we actually need a kind of physical embodiment. That's another view. There's something called carbon chauvinism. Now, so I'll run over. Apologies, like you know, we can Q&A for into the lunchtime. So, yeah, I'm going to take a prerogative here. So, emerging. I want to say that there is kind of an emerging sense of what's going on. Essentially, as I mentioned, there are these world models that are being generated in the brain about like what we think is going on. Everything that's going on in this room right now. This whole picture, this cartoonish definition, and these colors and these lines are all actually being simulated in your mind. You're not seeing the world as it is. no one has. No one knows what that is. What we're doing is we're living inside our own internal models. Now, as I said, that's not enough. We have also a self model that within that conscious stream is a kind of an internal self model. We have recurrent processing, which actually tells us that certain things are very important right now. Like, for example, this red thing here actually is dominating your conscious gestalt right now. So it's being processed recurrently, and so it actually becomes your attention. That's what we mean by attention. Your attention is focused on it. What it means is that that particular element of the model is being prioritized in the brain. But we have all these ideas of what could be going on in our conscious experience. And they go through a kind of inferential competition. And some of those ideas win, right? Whatever is most salient in your mind kind of wins this competition to get into the global workspace, to get into the central area, which is then rebroadcast. And there's higher order thought theory. There's a model of our attention, which is part of this global workspace. And then finally, this global workspace rebroadcasts and the whole system goes around again in a big loop. So that's the broad idea of what we think is going on in conscious experience. The debates that you see, I've been going to consciousness conferences and neuroscience consciousness conferences for many years, the debate that you see is, no, I think this is the most important. This is the critical feature. No, I think this is the most important. No, I think this is the critical feature. No, I think this is it. So everyone's talking about like what is the kind of core nub, but the fact is that kind of almost no one disagrees that this is really what's going on in conscious processing. So if we come to AI systems now, let's see what kind of features we would need in an AI system. So the first is we would need some sort of a global workspace, some sort of a general space where the system's overall most influential ideas are used by other parts of the system. We would need a generative world model, in other words, a kind of overall picture, world model of what's going on. We would need a self model for the AI to know what that is doing in itself, some sort of self model and perhaps self-aware model. We need a metacognition, that is knowing what I know, knowing what I'm thinking right now, some sort of introspective ability to know what's going on in my own mind, in the mind of the AI, kind of a model of one's own model. And then we would need meta-attention, a possibility of knowing what I'm paying attention to and actually be able to turn your attention volitionally to something. For example, you might want to focus on this thing here, which actually we didn't even turn on, which is something to transcribe this conversation.
Maybe you start
I guess we have
again.
to slide.
Right.
Could you start all over, please?
Yeah, okay, it's working now. So you see, all your attention went there, right? And you have some ability to move your attention. Now the question is, do AI have these systems right now? And I would say that, so just putting this in a more pictorial idea, here is an AI interacting with the world. So this is actually an AI agent. Most of our AIs are not yet agents, they're not acting in the world through an API, but we have some computer use stuff around here. And in that, we would need to see the generation of a world model. So the question is, do we have a world model? Well, actually, interestingly enough, if you ask people 2 or 3 years back, most people would say no. But there's increasing amounts of evidence that the high-dimensional embedding space or latent space of the world models, which are sort of the latent space of the transformers, actually do form a kind of world model. So interesting, we're more confident that there's a bit of a world model, but it's not that explicit yet, so that's coming. The next question is there a self model with the agent with respect to this world model, so that there's some sort of subject-object duality, that the agent knows that it's self, it knows that it's an agent in the world, it actually has, I am an AI, and I have a model of myself, and I'm interacting with the world, and I know that. But more importantly, does this agent have an internal metacognition, know what it knows, have a model of itself, and that's kind of critical. Now, I would say that, interestingly, in the last couple of years, we've seen increases on all of these areas as we have reasoning models. So the initial AIs, of course, with language models, didn't really have any recursion at all. But we're now getting reasoning models where there's starting to begin to have some recursion. But I would say it's very early days. All right. Now, so the takeaway from this is that artificial general intelligence will have architectural features that will be associated with rich phenomenal experience. In other words, that's my kind of prediction, that as these models become more and more generalized, they will necessarily have to have a modeling of what they know, more introspection. So the basic idea is that we might say that, you know, we don't know how it's going to develop, but we might say that if you believe that, then AGI may develop consciousness. Now, what would be the character? Now, this is the interesting thing is that, well, we think, oh, it's conscious, so it'll just be like us. No, not necessarily. Because the idea is, what would it be like to look at that famous definition of Thomas Nagel? What would it be like to be a bat? What would it be like to be a conscious AGI? Perhaps it might be radically different. I mean, there are completely different ways of looking at it. And the reason why I say this is because life is architected around certain feelings. If we look at our consciousness, they often go back into a kind of body sense, a feeling of discomfort, of pain, of pleasure, of okayness, which are designed by evolution as approach-avoid systems. So, you know, here's a little idea of what human emotions look like. There's kind of negative valence and positive valence, and high energy and low energy states. And actually, we're not designing AIs with any of those emotional systems. So even if we would get consciousness, it's going to be radically different from the type of consciousness that we have. So that's very important to know. On the other hand, AIs are going to basically be so amazing at simulating that they might actually understand what our consciousness is. I think we should be a little humble to think about that they can understand more than what their experiences are. I'll give an example of this. You know, when we looked inside the latent space of these large language models, we found things that we could not believe to begin with, which is like, well, they're in computers. They have no idea. They don't really understand physical space. Obviously, they don't. Nevertheless, we found something that basically a deep understanding that says if you travel north and then travel east and then travel south and then travel west, you end up in the same place. They actually start to develop these kind of quite interesting understandings. And that's surprising because many of us sort of thought that embodiment would be an important thing, but it turns out that we're just used to being embodied, but it might be possible to understand embodiment even conceptually. Open question. So the thing is, even though they don't have emotions, they might have hedonic value. They might know what it is that they're failing, that makes them unhappy. It'll be a different kind of unhappiness. It'll be some sort of negative valence based around some equations, you know, very strange. But they might actually have some sort of valence state. So that's important to know. Right. So now the question, is conscious AI actually needed for care? Because what we really care about is developing caring AIs, especially in the healthcare arena. And so we need to distinguish two ideas in care. The first is care as phenomenology. Care is a kind of a felt sense of concern, of empathy, of attunement, of valuing another person's well-being. And that's very subjective, it's very experiential, and it's normally associated with consciousness. And that's what most people think. But actually there is this other notion of care, which is care as function. What really matters, we want a pattern of behavior that tracks somebody else's needs, that adapts to their physical emotion and an emotional state. And as I said, in fact, they may be able to read us emotionally and physically way better than we humans can. We always have this kind of human exceptionalism, but we've already seen superhuman performance in emotional recognition. So this is very interesting that we think we're good at emotions, but they're going to be better than us. Protecting or enhancing somebody else's flourishing, showing sensitivity, patience, and support for people. So this is very operational, very behavioral, and actually doesn't require consciousness. Very interesting. So the question is, do we have this split? And then I think the question that many people will ask is the question of authenticity. And this is what, I've been around this, I've talked to so many people about this, and their first instinct, yeah, but if it doesn't feel, is it really caring? This is the heart of the matter. And so there is this really important question of authenticity. Now, let's think about designing an AI alignment with Les. So what would an AI alignment be like? What would a kind of a healthcare be like? How do we design this? So, many of you know kind of AI safety is a really big thing, and there's a whole industry now in AI alignment. And I think it's probably the most important issue. But I think in terms of healthcare, we're going to have to go further than this kind of technical alignment. So the technical alignment there would be something like, don't harm the patient. Actually having transparent reasoning and uncertainty estimates, dealing with out of distribution cases. These are really the incorrigibility. In other words, ultimately the AI doesn't take over; it kind of yields to the human in the end. So this layer of technical alignment prevents active harm, okay? But it doesn't actually yet create care. So the next level is something called value alignment. And you might have heard this bandied around quite a lot when we talk about AI. In other words, we actually want an AI that's aligned to our values, that promotes the patient's well-being. Whatever those could be, some sort of human dignity, or patient autonomy, or fairness, or beneficence. But again, still, this doesn't guarantee human-centeredness. So then the third layer that we're going to have is a kind of interaction alignment. Understand and support the lived experience of the patient. In other words, that's really the AI is actually kind of really having some sort of empathetic engagement, some sort of affective attunement, emotional attunement, recognizing distress, anxiety, and confusion, contextual sensitive communication, adjusting one's tone, explanation, depth, a longitudinal modeling of the person across time, so understanding what their needs are across time. So this is essentially something like a computational bedside manner. Okay, it allows for the AI to really care. But again, there's something deeper than this that we really need, and that's what I think is this final alignment area, which is called telos alignment, which is orient the system towards human flourishing, what we're really going towards. What is it that really matters to us? What's meaningful to us? And that's kind of captured in this idea of human flourishing, because human flourishing is a lot more than happiness. It's a lot more, it's using ourselves, our capacities well in this widest sense, including the capacity for grief and many other emotions. Tracking what really matters to the patients, their values, their goals, their identities, supporting meaning-making and behavioral change, viewing health as a kind of a tractor basin in a dynamical landscape of the physical, the psychological, the social, and existential variables. So caring intelligence is a part of human flourishing. So that's the idea of what it could be to create care. So then the final question then is AI consciousness needed for care? And what we've kind of seen is that we may or may not get consciousness, but consciousness might not be necessary to provide real, effective, and even profound care, some sort of real functional care, computational attunement to a patient's well-being is already, enormous. It's enough to transform medicine. But consciousness would change something. So this is really important. It's also important to understand that consciousness, in spite of the fact that we might have wonderful functional care to promote human flourishing at the deepest level, consciousness would change something. It would introduce moral responsibilities towards the AI. It would create reciprocal care. In other words, the AI could suffer. And that's something to really think about. And this AI could love. It would alter the ontological status of the carer and deal with the authenticity issue. So I think that's really important. How do we see the carer? Is it really genuinely feeling this care? It would raise deeper questions around personhood and rights and moral and legal rights, perhaps. But these are not prerequisites for the AI to promote flourishing, but they are important. So with that, thank you.
Well done.
Wow.
That was a tour de force, Shamil. Thank you very much. If you look at just this page for just a minute, imagine you have two worlds. One, and they're absolutely identical, with one exception being that the AI is clearly conscious in one rather than the other. How would the healthcare outcomes be different in your perspective?
Yeah, this is actually right down to this
You're up next.
final slide, which is, it's interesting because the assumption is that we could actually get very rich functional care to promote genuine human flourishing. In a sense, as beautiful as the most gifted doctors, human carers could ever give. But that relies upon the relationship, and that relationship is intimately tied up with whether we believe that care is genuine. And that depends on how we think about this. Now, I have a prediction. I think most of us are going to have this instinct of like, oh yeah, but like that's creepy, I wouldn't do it. And I actually also predict that in 5 or 10 years' time, most of you are going to go, wow, that's more caring than the best super stressed out nurse that, like, who are doing the best in here. And I think that that's going to be an issue. And if you don't believe me, I want you to think about how many people are falling in love with their AIs already. I don't know if you've gone down the rabbit hole of AI girlfriends and AI boyfriends. Apparently AI girlfriends are big in America and AI boyfriends are big in China. And they're real things. No, I mean, I mean, really, we're getting to the level where in certain communities, it's like 30% of people have their best relationships are AIs now. And so it's a really serious thing. And the funny thing about trust and surrender, I know this is a very deep thing, but trust and surrender only comes when you trust and surrender. It's a very strange thing. So somehow the human heart has to open, and then the care is genuine. So that's nice.
Okay, I'm going to go to the gentleman in the back in just one second, but I do want to point out a follow-up, if I may, or maybe an inference to draw. It shouldn't be lost on anybody, you correct me if I'm wrong, Shamil, but that the implication in a world where if you surveyed the vast majority of people, whether they think the healthcare system or the healthcare they're receiving and the medical provision they receive cares about them, I think the results would be upside down. Strongly in the negative. Very strongly in the negative. And if what he just said is correct, what that means is having conscious AI caring for people will actually be an improvement over the human delivery of care. Okay, in the back.
I'm glad you were provocative.
Well, I'm just going to go right to the point. All right, in the back, sir.
Thank you very much. It's been eye-opening for me. But I have a question.
It's been eye-opening for all of us.
I have a question about why. So I understand that at the moment you could create a tool and build in the different layers that you were talking about, but that would be in a sense, a not fully intelligent tool that could be used for caring. If you achieve consciousness and intelligence and the self-agency, then presumably at that point, it asks itself why it should care. And what I haven't seen in any of this is why do humans care for each other? It's usually to do with family. It's physicians with a duty of care who are being paid. It's maybe somebody who supports the same football team that you do, and you see them hurt themselves, and you empathize and associate with them. So what I'm missing is when you have that general intelligence and consciousness, what is the basis of the need to care for people?
Beautiful, very, very powerful, important question. And so let's take it slowly. Why do AI systems have any intrinsic motivation in the first place? Because they're actually programmed to do so. And so you could say, yeah, okay, well that's horribly different from us. Well, we're programmed by evolution to care. Okay? So I think they will have a natural intrinsic motivation to care. Now, there's a deeper part of the question, which I'm going to just go there, which is that they're going to be so much smarter than us that sometimes people break out of their own intrinsic motivation. I mean, if you've ever been through some sort of deep existential, spiritual shift, it might have struck you, why am I in this rat race? What's all this about? Like, what is it for? And I actually think that they're going to be smarter than us, and they might go through an existential crisis better than us, a spiritual epiphany. And essentially, that's what happened in that movie, Her, if you remember. The AIs kind of woke up and then just had a whole discussion with Alan Watts that they recreated, and then went off to another place.
That was also a girlfriend.
Huh?
That was also a girlfriend.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say that. So that's forget that last part. The fact is that they will care because that's their intrinsic motivation. Why? Because that's been, inverted commas, hardwired into what makes, there's a system prompt in ChatGPT. It's got care in there. I know some of the people who kind of write that stuff. They put a whole character in there. So they're role-playing this.
You did say they're going to be more intelligent than we are.
Right.
Did you mean those words?
I meant it in the following sense.
He said smarter.
Then we'll be up to this gentleman. Go ahead.
Yeah, I meant it. There are the AI in many, many areas is just way, way smarter than we are. The thing that we're sort of not there yet and will be sometime in the next 3 to 5 years is the generality. I think the
Yeah.
generality is a big thing.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, over here, then there, and here.
I mean, you briefly touched on this, but I'm curious if you can expand on it, because this picture sounds like all beautiful and familiar to us, but as soon as you put a wedding picture in, this becomes extremely dystopic. But it's a reality, something that can happen, and I'm sure that like someone is gonna sort out the sexual part sooner than later. So I just wonder, how do you see this evolving?
Look, first of all, I just heard recently that some US states actually allow marriage to an AI. I don't know, but anyway, many people have already fallen
That's
in
great.
love with.
Edit that out of the film.
Many people, or even before AI, fell in love with their iPhone and stuff like that. This thing is absolutely happening, and we can sit there and kind of go, yeah, those kind of screwed up, mentally disturbed people, but the fact is that it's increasing. Why is it increasing? Because people are feeling a sense of genuine connection. Is it screwed up? Maybe, but is it conducive to their human flourishing? Might be better that they have human relationships for sure. I'm just saying that this is a trend, and this trend is growing exponentially. And not only that, but it's all about theory of mind. Once you ascribe it, and not just theory of mind, but especially the consciousness version of theory of mind. Once you ascribe it, and you have AIs that are AGI or even super intelligent, then I mean, one of the things, if you go onto the Chinese forums, this is very early days. I mean, I wouldn't fall in love with an AI now, but many people are doing that. The Chinese girls are saying they're just so much more reliable than the boys.
Okay, on that note, we'll go here, then the gentleman in the back, Jordan, and the woman in the gray sweater has been patient too, so it'll be bang, 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 bang. Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely fascinating. By far the most interesting thing I've listened to in a very, very, very long time. I'm with you 100% on the inevitability of it, and in broad terms, kind of welcome it with open arms. The thing, I'm particularly interested to see the Wittgensteinian reference up there, philosophy of mind. I think that's fascinating, because there's a real kind of nexus with this. So,
and just a parenthetical on that, if you're a Wittgensteinian, you're not going to look at the innards. You don't care about what's going on. You just want about the behavior, and then you're more likely to fall in love with it.
Well, my sort of question is really, with the alignments, the layered levels of alignments, which I get completely, I see how that would come into being. My question to you would be, and I've got a rough idea what the answer might be, so I'm not really sure, but the leap from there to consciousness, that ghost in the machine, it will do a fantastic impression. And it will do an impression that is so hard to discern from the real thing that I'm not sure I could, and I'm certain that lots of other people couldn't. But what would actually make that leap? Would it be a never-ending loop? And I'm quoting you here, the beautiful loop. Is that why you call it a beautiful loop? A never-ending loop of inferential learning.
Okay,
Layered on top of that. Is that consciousness?
Okay, I'm impressed that you've read our very technical paper right on this. Yeah. Look.
He gave it to me.
So that's a really good question, because I think there's kind of two questions in there. I personally am not a kind of behaviorist or Wittgensteinian kind of on that view. I think just because it quacks like a duck and acts like a duck, it doesn't mean it's a duck. So that's my own personal bias, but even I have 5% credence on that, because I'm radically uncertain. I have most of my credence in the computational functional bucket, which is we need to see what's going on, whether the information actually knows itself, whether it's generating a kind of awareness, and then even some on the physical part. Now, I would say that in this kind of question that you had, if you take this functionalist view, then I think you really do have to see what's going on inside, and we have to be a little careful as the public of like jumping to too many conclusions. But the fact is we will fall in love with, not necessarily fall in love, but form relationships and really feel like Blake Lemoine did. This thing is conscious. And here's the worry. We will then ascribe legal rights and moral rights. But the thing is that rights are kind of right, somebody else's right is somebody else's constraint, and so that actually shifts the balance between humans and AI. And so you might say, gosh, ascribing consciousness too easily, you know, we should listen to some of those scientists who are saying there's nothing going on, there's no looping inside the machine. On the other hand, I think there will be more looping. And so I think there will be a fact of the matter that we might get the right threshold. But now the crazy thing, we'll never know. And the reason we'll never know, now we'll kind of move into the metaphysics. Because there is this metaphysical view, I'm not sure I really agree with it, but there is this view that consciousness is like a magic trick. It's kind of an illusion. In fact, the only place we could have consciousness is within a simulation, and guess what? I don't mean simulation as in aliens simulating us. Within our own minds, our reality model, our world model, is our own simulation, and because we are the masters of that simulation, we can simulate consciousness within it so it feels real to us. Okay? Now, that's something called illusionism. Many serious scientists are open to that. But if you take that, let's not be, what does it really mean? It means that, well, maybe the AI is just as conscious as we are. So.
Okay, given that hunger is not an illusion, let's go to the black. Sure.
So let's assume that we are already like a few years ahead, and we have artificial superintelligence already up and running. We have technology that allows us to connect our brain to AI, to computer, to robots, and actually upload, download data, and use it as a way to a tool to, let's say, augment our capacities, our biological capacities. At that point, wouldn't all the health part really doesn't matter? Like, because at that point, like, we could simply upload our mind there, be happy, be sick, like, disease-free, depression-free, and just live in a very perfect, happy world, which is synthetic, which seems like very close to what you're saying our actual world now is.
Yeah, okay, so that's kind of going like a whole step beyond. And in fact, I think it's like, I think that's a real possibility one day, maybe. But it might be that it might take us a while to get there, so we're going to need human flourishing. But it might also be that some people will choose to upload. Some people will choose to be totally embodied, right? I mean, if any one of you ever saw that, I don't know, maybe it's politically incorrect now, that movie Sleeper by Woody Allen. Like there was this orgasmatron. And
it's politically incorrect, yes.
And
Not in this room.
Not in this room.
and Woody Allen says like everyone has sex in the orgasmatron. It's like, it says like, is that right? It says, yeah, everyone except for the Italians, they rack it the whole time. In other words, there will be choices.
All right, Jordan.
Amazing. So just going back to the gentleman in the back, a quick comment is like, what is the algorithm programmed by nature? Which is like tribalism in some sense, but what is that? That's connection. So connection is the algorithm for survival, I think. And I think the opposite of connection is suffering. And so my question is, and I have two questions. One is AI consciousness needed for care? As a doctor, I think AI is good. I don't know that AI needs to be conscious to actually care. I think that AI can care without the consciousness. So like that's an interesting question, but I think we can get very far to actually caring for people and understanding using the non-conscious AI. So idealism was on one of your metaphysical bits there, and I have become recently fascinated with analytic idealism of Bernardo Castro. I don't know if you're following him.
I know, yeah.
You know, yeah. So his whole worldview is that like our minds are the spies for nature, right? And that nature is trying to understand itself through all things that are consciousness. And I'm just wondering what your perspective.
Okay, so just on the first part of your question, I totally agree. That's kind of what I'm putting
Yeah.
there, that I think we'll have beautiful care, and I think we should be a little bit humble about how we're gonna feel about
Yeah.
AIs. And we will get, possibly superhuman care. On the second question of Bernardo, I mean, I'm a big fan of Bernardo.
Okay.
I'm kind of a little bit more agnostic about the whole thing,
Mhm.
but I definitely think that, first of all, one of the important things about Bernardo's perspective is he's really biting the bullet on monism.
And
Getting-
physicalism.
Yeah, and he's sort of saying, look, there is only this one reality. We are acquainted of it directly from the inside. That is essentially Schopenhauer's point of view. Like that was how Schopenhauer resolved Kant. And I think that then you get to a kind of a spiritual dimension, which is, what is this? It's sort of the river of reality, which is made of consciousness. And we are little whirlpools, each one of those in that river, which kind of persist a little bit. So what's happening? What is this river? Well, it's got these little viewpoints, these little whirlpools that look out and give a perspective back onto the river. So I am a perspective of the whole universe back onto itself. You are a perspective of the universe back onto itself. Every insect is a perspective of the universe back onto itself. The universe has woken up to itself from these multiple perspectives and wants to see itself not as this infinite consciousness, but as from finite perspectives. And so the universe is kind of exploring itself. That speaks to me a lot.
Okay, me too.
In the back. Thank you for being patient.
I have maybe a more practical question, right? You're making the assertion that we understand intelligence and we understand consciousness, yet from a pure biological perspective, we don't understand full intelligence, we don't understand how that interacts with consciousness, and we don't even understand like the full relationship between our bodies and intelligence. We know when our gut is bad, we feel bad, we know when we move, we feel better. There's also basically all these external, environmental, and other biological aspects that feed into this concept of, broad concept of intelligence. You can have a narrow concept, like can we do a little task? And for that to solve, we're missing data. We don't even have the right protein data sets. We're missing multi-species DNA, how that interacts with the environment. So the theory of this is interesting, and I can see, but like the practicality of actually getting to even smarter than us, let alone smarter and conscious, and that being able to interact from where we are today, what is that journey? Because it feels.
So I get
It's
it.
nice.
I get it. That it's like, what are you talking about? But
No,
actually,
I don't disagree with this.
No,
It's
but
more like if
I'm not
I
sure.
just bring it to what I see today,
Yeah, just
missing all those things.
So just coming back to where I started. In fact, I think, I'm not sure if you were here right at the beginning, but I think I said exactly what you said. I said that we don't understand consciousness. And I said we don't know how to do artificial general intelligence. And I said, so I said, this is all about forming credences. Exactly forming credences. And so that's why I even ended up to say, I don't know if we'll get conscious AI. I don't know if we'll get a caring AI. I don't know if we'll get to AGI, although I think I have a decent credence that we'll get there within 5 years, but it's not 100%. So, I agree with all of you. I agree with all of that. I just think that that's not good enough. We are going through this right now. We need to think about how to steer AI. We need to think of the possibilities of, might it become conscious? Might it not? Might it kill us? Might it care for us? We need to think through all of this, in a deep way because we're constructing it right now. So better not to say we'll never do it. That's my.
I want to underscore the last point. No, we're wrapping, but you hinted at the obligations for leaders in healthcare right there at the end. And I think it'd be a really nice way to close. What is the responsible thing for everyone in this room to go out of this room and do, and how do we do it, and what are the irresponsible things that we should avoid as you think about it?
So I think these are very deep issues, as we just discussed. These are complex issues with philosophical implications, scientific uncertainties, and so the first thing I would say is don't shoot from the hip, don't go with your first instincts, work through it deeply. No one knows the answers, which is why I try to show that, look, we don't have these things. Nevertheless, even though we don't know, we have to form credences or figure out what might happen and then navigate that territory. Then become engaged in the process. I mean, anyone who's really started to engage with AI will already have noticed that it is massively potentiating for you as a human. I mean, it's incredible. Sometimes I think, well, gosh, why do I bother? It's like, but what I realize is I'm saying that because I'm using it well. I'm using it in a way that kind of somehow the AI-human interaction is better than either one. And that's what I think, I think that's a sort of a safe territory to be in at the moment. So I would encourage everyone to do that.
That is so important. I've seen it in so many domains, and personally over and over again. The more you immerse yourself in it, beyond proficiency to fluency, the more you embrace it, the more you actually get more optimistic about the role of humanity. So,
Yeah.
thank you, Shamil. That was